Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the Heiress of Savannah. It began with a phone call from Lon Cohen. That's not unusual. What was unusual was the strain in his voice. "She's on her way to you, Goodwin," he said. "Josephine Calhoun Weatherly. She's got money, charm, and the kind of name that sounds like it owns 4 counties. She coming for Wolfe or for gossip?" "For Wolfe. Said she wouldn't talk to anyone else. She's already left her hotel. Be kind." He hung up without waiting for more. I looked at the phone a moment longer, then rose and crossed to the front window. Across 35th Street, snow was starting again, thin flakes that spun and scattered like disoriented moths. I checked my watch. Just after 11. Wolfe had another 40 minutes before orchid time ended. I doubted he'd be pleased. Still, I didn't have long to wait. A black Packard pulled up. The driver stepped out first, opened the back door with the reverence of a priest unveiling a reliquary, and stood aside. She emerged slowly, like someone descending a staircase unseen. Grey silk coat, gloves that matched the snow, and a small hat pinned to her hair in the way women do when they want it to be noticed. In her right hand, she held an envelope. I waited for the bell. When it rang, it was 3 times. Even. No pause. Not tentative. I took my time. Fritz would never answer the door, and I never rushed unless bullets were involved. When I opened it, I saw what Lon meant. She was tall, southern, and carved from whatever marble Georgia reserves for forgotten cathedrals. Her eyes were storm-coloured. The envelope in her hand was cream, thick, and marked in one corner with something that looked like dried wine, but wasn't. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting me," she said, voice quiet but unyielding. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the envelope. She didn't shift her hand, didn't move to conceal it. It was the kind of gesture people don't rehearse. "What's in the envelope?" "Something that should have reached my cousin before he died." That made me move. I opened the door fully, stepped back and gestured her in. She entered like a woman used to grand rooms and small lies. The coat shimmered faintly as she passed the threshold. "In here," I said, leading her toward the office. Wolfe was in his chair, the yellow one naturally. The red client chairs stood across the rug like well-behaved children waiting for their names to be called. He was reading something bound in leather and older than the Magna Carta. "Mr. Wolfe," I said. "Josephine Calhoun Weatherly." He did not look up. She moved toward the chair without being told. She sat, back straight, knees together, the envelope resting on her lap. Wolfe turned a page. The sound was precise. Then he looked at her. "You have come uninvited," he said. She inclined her head slightly. "I've come at the suggestion of Lon Cohen. I've warned Lon against presumptions. And yet, here I am." Wolfe closed the book. I took my chair near the desk and crossed my legs. Wolfe folded his hands across his stomach. "Proceed." "My cousin, Lucian Weatherly, died 3 months ago. Officially, he drowned while sailing off Tybee Island. The boat was found, so was the body." "Unfortunate," Wolfe said, "but not uncommon." "I believe he was murdered." I looked at the envelope. So did Wolfe. He nodded at it. "You may place that on the desk." She did, carefully. The cream paper made a soft sound as it touched the oak. Wolfe gestured. I picked it up, turned it over. No return address. The handwriting was elegant. Fluid cursive in violet ink. There were 3 small stains near the flap. One had a rusty edge. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I unfolded it. "Dear Lucien," it began, "the matter of the Weatherly estate must be resolved before Clayton finds means to interfere. I have secured the signature and the notary. Once it reaches you, burn the copy. Your cousin must not know." It was unsigned. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it twice. Then he looked up. "This was addressed to your cousin?" "Yes." "When did you receive it?" 2 days ago. It was slipped under my hotel door. I never saw who left it." "And you are certain it was meant for Lucien?" "The handwriting belongs to Tobias Kember, our family attorney." Wolfe sniffed. "Have you confronted him?" "I called. He denied it." "He would," Wolfe said. "Did you know your cousin was revising his will?" Her face didn't change, but her left thumb began to tap lightly against the side of the chair. Yes. Wolfe watched the tapping for 5 seconds, then he looked away. Why do you suspect murder? She paused, then softly. Because Lucien was afraid. He wrote to me 3 days before the accident. He said he'd uncovered something about the company, about our grandfather's accounts. He said it would change the entire balance of the estate. Did he specify? No, but he asked me to come to Manhattan. He planned to bring everything here. And then he died? Yes, the night before I was to leave. I stood. Excuse me, may I? She turned. I pointed at the brooch on her lapel. It was gold, oval, etched with a crosshatch of vines. Delicate, Georgian, or at least something pretending to be. My mother's, she said, as I returned to my seat. She wore it to Lucien's christening. Wolfe ignored the detail. Were you close to your cousin? We were raised together, but not equally. He was the heir, I was the footnote. And yet he summoned you. Yes. To Manhattan? Yes. To share a secret? Yes. Wolfe leaned back. Have you any proof? Only the letter you hold. Hardly conclusive. She nodded, then reached into her coat and removed a smaller slip of paper. This came with the letter. It was folded inside. I took it. A postmarked receipt. Manhattan, 3 months ago. The ink was the same violet hue. Lucien's name appeared in the recipient field. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it. Then he frowned. The date. Yes, she said. It is 2 days after the reported death. Yes, Wolfe exhaled. You believe Lucien never died? I believe someone died in his place. That did it. Wolfe shifted in his chair. Not much, but enough. And where is your cousin now? I don't know. You believe he sent this letter after faking his death? I believe he tried. And the recipient intercepted it. Yes. I turned toward Wolfe. He looked at the receipt again. Where are you staying? The Belmont on 44th. Under your name? Yes. That was unwise. I have nothing to hide. That may be temporary. She said nothing. Wolfe reached for his bell. Fritz entered. Beer, Wolfe said. Fritz vanished again. I waited until the door closed. Then I leaned forward. What do you want us to do, Miss Weatherly? She turned toward me. Her eyes were steady. I want to know the truth. And I want to know what happened to Lucien. Wolfe didn't answer. He took a sip from the glass Fritz placed on the coaster. Then he closed his eyes. I will consider it, he said. She nodded. Thank you. Then she rose. I stood to escort her out. At the threshold, she turned to me. You believe me? I believe you're not trembling because you're afraid. She smiled. No, not fear. What then? Because this time, I'm not alone. She stepped into the snow, grey silk vanishing into white. I closed the door and leaned against it. In the office, Wolfe grunted. Mr. Goodwin? Yes? Find out where Tobias Kember is staying. Any preference for method? Discreet. I took my coat and hat and left. Outside, the snow had thickened. Josephine Weatherly was gone. The envelope remained. So did the blood. Josephine Weatherly returned at 3:30, wrapped in a wool coat the colour of storm clouds and wearing a veil that didn't quite hide the set of her jaw. She stepped into the office with no hesitation, though her gloves stayed on. Wolfe had just finished his beer. The glass stood empty on the coaster, a smear of foam like a punctuation mark. He didn't greet her. Neither did I. She sat in the red chair with a slow precision and opened her handbag. From it, she drew a document tube and a folded sheet of paper, then placed both carefully on the edge of Wolfe's desk. That, she said, indicating the tube, is a copy of my cousin's revised will. This, her gloved fingers rested briefly on the folded sheet, is the lawyer's cover letter. I'd like both examined. Wolfe blinked. By whom? By someone not beholden to the Weatherly name. I retrieved both items, unrolled the will and began scanning. Legal language. Dense, formal, proper. 3 pages, 4 signatories. The date was 3 days before Lucien's reported death. The name on the top line, Lucien Harlan Weatherly. Executor, Tobias Kember. Beneficiary, Josephine Calhoun Weatherly. Clayton Weatherly and Adele Myrick weren't mentioned. Not once. I handed it to Wolfe. He read without comment. When he reached the final paragraph, he looked up. Who held the original? Tobias Kember. You saw it signed? No, but I received this duplicate by post 6 days ago. And you trust it? I believe it reflects Lucien's wishes. He told me himself. When? 2 days before his accident, in a telephone call. He informed you of your inheritance? He informed me of his decision, not the document. Wolfe grunted. I unfolded the cover letter, standard stationery. The handwriting was a tight, angular script in blue-black ink, faintly smudged near the salutation. Dated the day after the will's signature. I read it aloud. Miss Weatherly, as per the wishes of the deceased, enclosed is a certified copy of the revised testament. I advise discretion, as the will may be contested. If you require further documentation, I remain available. Respectfully, Tobias R. Kember. Wolfe lifted a brow. The deceased? Yes. He wrote this after Lucien's death? He claims to have posted it the morning before. And you believe him? No. Wolfe tapped the desk. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir? Find Mr. Kember. Do not identify yourself as my associate. Understood. Secure a sample of his handwriting, ideally something dated. I rose, checked my notebook, and stepped toward the hall. Try the Grayson or the Hotel Van Zandt, Josephine offered. He prefers old brass elevators. I gave a nod and left. Outside, the street was slick from thawing snow. A cab took me down Madison to the Grayson, where I inquired after Mr. Kember using a manufactured accent and the name Stephen Van Lowe. The clerk handed me a small guest card to sign. I watched his eyes as I wrote, then asked for stationery for an urgent reply. He handed over 2 sheets and an envelope marked with the hotel crest. I returned to the brownstone in under 40 minutes. Wolfe was reading again. Josephine was gone. She left the moment you departed, he said. I nodded and handed over the samples. Wolfe compared the cover letter to the guest card. He used a magnifier, said nothing, then handed them back. The slant is similar, he said, but the descenders on the Y and G are wrong. You think it's forged? I think someone wrote it in haste, possibly with reference to prior notes. I settled in. Let's suppose, I said, that the will is real, that Lucien changed it days before his death. Josephine is sole heir. Clayton and Adele are out. Then Lucien dies, and Kember sends her this copy, but signs it with someone else's hand. Wolfe lifted a brow. You suggest he feared reprisal? I suggest he wanted plausible deniability. Or, Wolfe said, he did not send it at all. We let that sit. Then Wolfe rang for Fritz. When the beer arrived, Wolfe took a sip and closed his eyes. It is conceivable, he murmured, that Lucien planned his own disappearance. I turned. Suicide? No, escape. I frowned. But why fake a death he stood to benefit from? Perhaps he did not. The phone rang. I answered. It was Inspector Kramer. I hear you're sticking your nose in a drowned man's grave. Not yet, I said. But Wolfe's thinking about it. Kramer growled. Tell him the Weatherly file is closed. No evidence. Body was identified by dental, wallet and coat label. Family signed off. No suspicion, no inquiry. Even with a new will? Especially with a new will. They pop up like crocuses. I relayed that to Wolfe. He didn't respond. Then he asked for the envelope the cover letter came in. Josephine had left it tucked in the will tube. I extracted it. Wolfe held it between thumb and forefinger. No postmark. Courier? Or hand-delivered? I nodded. Which means someone in Manhattan had access to both Kember's paper and Lucien's estate documents. Yes. He looked at the cover letter again. Something troubles me. What? The ink is Parker Quink, common, but the pressure varies. Someone nervous? Someone copying? I leaned forward. Clayton? Too crude. Adele? Possible. I tapped the will, then we verify it. He nodded. You'll visit Kember tomorrow, at the hotel. Ask about the Weatherly estate. If he mentions the will, inquire naturally. If he does not, ask nothing. Should I show the copy? Only if he denies it. I returned the papers to their case and rose. Did she seem sincere? Wolfe opened his eyes. She did. But? She wants truth. but only if it aligns with her memory. That's most people. Wolfe inclined his head. She may be more honest than she realizes. About what? About her cousin. I paused at the door. Do you believe Lucien's dead? Wolfe's voice was soft. I believe someone wanted him to be. Then I left. The night had turned colder. A man stepped out of the alley near 34th Street as I passed. He lit a cigarette and watched me walk. I kept my hand near my pocket but didn't break stride. When I glanced back, he was gone. Back in the office, Wolfe hadn't moved. The will remained on the desk. In the corner, the envelope with no postmark sat like a question no one could answer. Yet. The Grayson Hotel hadn't changed. Still smelled like cigars, linen starch, and quiet bribes. It was the kind of place where bellboys walked like they were in church and the elevator made no apologies for being slow. I checked in under the name Merritt Fielding and requested a third-floor suite facing the street. I told the clerk I was in textiles, coastal linens. He didn't care. He slid a brass key across the marble, then rang the elevator without a word. Room 314 was near the end of the corridor, past an alcove with a settee and a mirror that had seen better decades. The hallway carpet was the same dull red I remembered from 2 years back when we'd tracked a phosphate fraudster through the ballroom. I knocked twice, no answer. Then from behind, "You're early." Tobias Kember wasn't tall, but he made a point of standing as though he were. Trim moustache, black gloves, and a necktie with a silver pin that looked like a chess piece. "Mr. Fielding?" he said. "In the flesh," I replied. We shook hands. His was dry, narrow-boned, not a labourer's grip. "I thought we were meeting in the lounge," he said. "I prefer quiet," I told him. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and unlocked the door. Inside, the room smelled faintly of shaving cream and legal paper. A leather briefcase rested on the small writing table near the window. A copy of the Herald Tribune lay beside it, folded to the financial page. Kember gestured to the armchair. I sat. "You said on the phone," I began, "that you handled the Weatherly estate." He nodded, removing his gloves. "Yes, for nearly 9 years." "You were in town when Lucien died." "I was," he said. "Coincidence." "And now?" "I've business here. The estate is mostly settled. The assets are being reviewed." I looked at him. "Did you send a letter to Josephine Calhoun Weatherly after her cousin's death?" His eyes met mine. "No." "You're sure?" "I am." I reached into my inner coat pocket and slowly withdrew the folded copy of the letter she'd received. I handed it over. He read it in silence, then folded it again and placed it on the side table. "That is not my handwriting." "May I see something of yours?" I asked. He pulled a notepad from the inside of his coat and scribbled a line across the top. "Received 17th of January. Confirm ledger transfer from estate to trust account." He tore it off and handed it over. It wasn't a match, but it wasn't far. I tucked it away. "You don't deny the will was updated," I said. He reached for the briefcase. "I don't deny the intention, but the final execution was private. I was not present." He popped the latches. I caught a glimpse of contracts, receipts, a ledger. Then he pulled out a manila folder. "This is the last copy I reviewed." He set it on the table. I kept my posture relaxed, shoulders back, legs uncrossed. When he reached for the newspaper, I leaned forward, adjusted the hem of my trouser, and slid the top page of the will into my inner coat pocket. One movement, no hesitation. He didn't notice. "Why wasn't the updated will contested?" I asked. "Because no one knew it existed." "Not even Adele Myrick?" I said no one. I let the name hover. He didn't flinch. "You knew Lucien well?" "As one knows clients. He was particular. Always preferred fountain pens to typewriters. Insisted on violet ink. Old habits." I nodded. "And Clayton?" Kember adjusted his cuff. "Never liked Manhattan. Said it smelled like old decisions." "That's poetic." "It was meant to be." I stood. "Well," I said, "thank you for your time." He escorted me to the door. "Do extend my regards to the textile conference," he said, smiling faintly. "I'll embroider them into the agenda." In the hallway, I walked slowly, counting footsteps. At the elevator, I slipped the will page into my wallet and folded the handwriting sample into my inside sleeve. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reading. The yellow chair creaked softly as he shifted. Fritz brought the beer without being asked. I handed Wolfe the notepad scrap. He studied it. "Similar pressure," he said. But the ascenders are longer. He did not write the letter. He also claims he wasn't present when the will was signed. Yet he holds a copy. Yes. I placed the stolen page on the desk. Wolfe read it, then tapped the lower margin. The witnesses are listed, but illegible. Deliberately smudged? Possibly. Possibly not. He leaned back. "Saul," he said. I picked up the phone and dialed. When he answered, I relayed the instruction. Tail Tobias Kemba, no contact, full record. Saul grunted and hung up. Wolfe rose and walked slowly to the table beneath the west windows. His orchids were in their second bloom. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes." "The envelope Josephine brought. Where is it?" "In the case." "Retrieve it." I did. He held it to the light. "There," he said. I moved closer. A faint smudge on the lower edge of the flap. Barely visible. He held it beneath his nose. Rose. Possibly jasmine. A floral blend. "Perfume?" "No. Scented stationery. Southern custom." "Not Kemba's style?" "No." He returned to his chair. "Which means it was handled by someone with access to Lucien's personal effects." "Josephine?" "She claims it arrived at her door." "Adele?" "Perhaps." I sat down. "Wolfe." "Yes?" Kemba lied. He didn't answer, just lifted his beer and sipped once, slowly. Outside, Manhattan carried on, unaware that somewhere between Savannah and 35th Street, a man's death was becoming less certain by the hour. It was just past 10 when Josephine returned. Fritz had already cleared away the remains of Wolfe's breakfast, and the orchid room door was still closed, which meant we were in that golden sliver of time when Mr. Wolfe was tolerable before lunch, but not yet annoyed by the sight of humanity. She stepped into the office with a framed photograph held flat against her coat. Her gloves were off. The scent of lilac preceded her, faint but unmistakable. "I found it," she said. "It was in the study at the house in Savannah, locked in a drawer. Lucien hated clutter." Wolfe gestured for her to sit. She placed the photograph on the desk without ceremony, then took the red chair. I picked it up carefully. Lucien Weatherly stared out from a sun-washed veranda, seated in a rattan chair beside a carved balustrade. He looked older than his age. Too many thoughts, not enough smiles. But he was composed, coat unbuttoned, legs crossed, holding a slim leather book. There was a newspaper beside him, folded neatly, a glass of iced tea untouched. The date was scrawled on the back in faint pencil. September 4. 2 weeks before the drowning. Something in the frame caught my eye. I leaned closer. Lucien's left wrist, partially obscured by the sleeve, bore a watch. Nothing strange about that. But below it, at a slight angle, was a shadow, just visible in the crook of the wrist. Narrow, oblong, a second strap. I held it toward the light. "Wolfe," I said. "I think he's wearing 2 watches." He squinted, then beckoned. I handed it over. Wolfe examined it closely, held it at 2 angles, then looked at Josephine. "Did he ever wear more than 1? "No," she said firmly. "Never. That would have irritated him." "Then what is the shadow?" "His pocket watch," she said, "always on a chain. He kept it in the inner breast pocket of his coat." Wolfe nodded. "Describe it." "Gold. French. Late 1800s. It was his father's." "And the wristwatch?" "He wore that only for travel. Said the train demanded it." Wolfe placed the photograph on the blotter. "Where is the pocket watch now?" She paused. They said it wasn't found." "Nor the wallet," I added. Her eyes flicked to me. "No, the coroner's inventory listed neither." Wolfe exhaled softly. "That is unusual." Josephine sat forward. "You think someone else wore the watch?" "I think the man in that photograph had 2 timepieces," Wolfe said, "and the man they buried had none." Silence. The fire in the grate cracked. Fritz moved behind the partition, quiet, respectful. Wolfe steepled his fingers. The body was identified by dental records, she replied. "And his coat. It had his tailor's label." "The tailor?" "Denson and Rowley, Savannah." I reached for the Rolodex, but Wolfe waved me off. "Later." I nodded. Josephine adjusted the edge of her sleeve. Her voice dropped. I asked the coroner discreetly about the condition of the body. "Yes?" He said there was damage, face bloated, jaw broken, something about rocks. Identification could be mistaken, Wolfe said. She said nothing. The photograph lay between us. Miss Weatherly, Wolfe said at last, you are certain this was taken 2 weeks before the death? I was there, she said. I took it. I looked up. You took it? Yes. He didn't object? No, he was in a good mood that day. What had changed? She looked at Wolfe. He'd told me he was changing the will. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. And then you left for Charleston? Yes, I was gone 3 days. When I returned, he was gone. And you did not attend the funeral? No, I wasn't invited. Wolfe's expression didn't shift. Archie Goodwin might have winced. Nero Wolfe only inhaled. You mentioned rocks, he said. Were there photographs of the recovered body? No, she said. Lucian always requested no embalming. They buried him quickly, closed casket. I rose. Savannah Chronicle Archives, I said. Give me an hour. Wolfe nodded. Bring coffee, he murmured. Outside, the wind had turned brisk. Manhattan had begun its late morning shuffle, cabs thick, sidewalks louder, steam from grates curling under skirts. I headed for the public library and found the Chronicle reels under September. 2 rolls later, I hit it. Body of Lucian Weatherly, prominent Savannah financier, found off shoals at Tybee. Police confirm identification. Wallet, watch missing. No mention of injuries, no cause listed, just accidental drowning. The only photo was of the shoreline, empty, wide and brown. I clipped the article and returned. Josephine was still there, coat off now, hands folded in her lap. Wolfe sipped his coffee. He looked up as I entered and raised a brow. I handed him the clipping. He read it, then passed it to her. Missing, she whispered. They told me the storm washed everything away. Unlikely, Wolfe said, especially the watch. She looked down. What are you thinking? She asked. That someone wanted a body to be found, he said, but not identified. She stared at the fire. Who would do that? That, Wolfe said, is not yet the question. Then what is? Where is the watch? She said nothing. Mr. Goodwin, he said, get the original coroner's report. I nodded. Would you like it by telephone or telegram? Neither. Go to Savannah. Josephine looked up. That's risky. Mr. Goodwin is skilled at courthouses, Wolfe said. I opened my mouth, closed it, then opened it again. You do recall I'm banned from Chatham County? Only informally, Wolfe said. I sighed. Fritz, he called. Fritz appeared. Pack Mr. Goodwin's case, 3 shirts, linen. Fritz nodded and vanished. Josephine stood. I can arrange lodging. No need, I said. I know a judge with a soft spot for bribery. She gathered her things, but before leaving turned back to the photo. Do you believe he's alive? I believe, Wolfe said. The corpse was missing 2 items. Items no man forgets. She left. I sat down. Wolfe looked at me. If the man in the water wasn't Lucian Weatherly, I nodded, then the man in the photograph may still be alive. The phone on Wolfe's desk rang just after 11. He didn't glance up from his book. He never does. I picked it up, cradled it under my chin and said my name. A pause, then a voice that rasped like fried onions. This Detective Maris in Savannah. You got your payment? 2 20s and a pack of camels. That you did. So here's the skinny. Body was pulled off the shoals 3 days after the storm. Face wasn't pretty, jaw broken, skin mottled, but not bloated beyond ID, no wallet, no watch, but shoes were dry. 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 Italian. Black leather, still shining. Bespoke. I sat forward. Describe them. Clever bros stamp, handmade, size 11, like he'd never touched sand. I glanced at Wolfe. Anything else strange? Feet were clean, that stood out. Most drownings, the toes tell you the truth. Not this one. Was the body positively ID'd? Family signed off. Dentist confirmed dental chart. Case closed. You want the autopsy summary? I do. 2 cracked ribs, bruised scapula, lungs filled with seawater. Shoelaces tied. Tight, navy knots. Thanks. I hung up and turned toward Wolfe. He was found in Italian shoes, dry, feet clean, body bruised. Wolfe closed the book, a sure sign of thought. Lucian Weatherly, he said slowly. Was last seen alive in Savannah? Yes. By whom? His tailor. I retrieved the telegram from the tray, sent overnight. Response typed neatly. Lucian last fitted for travel boots. Wore brown leather lace-ups when he left for Tybee. Travel boots, I repeated. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. He gestured to the envelope Josephine had brought, now tucked in its case beside his blotter. Fetch it. I did. Wolfe held it to the light again. The scent lingered. Floral, faint, wrong for a death letter. Mr. Goodwin, he said, we require a match. To what? To the ink. He produced Lucien's last known letter, a copy sent from Savannah 4 days before his alleged drowning. I retrieved the penknife from my desk drawer and carefully slit a corner of the envelope Josephine brought. Then I uncapped the vial Wolfe handed me. You'll blot the interior edge, he instructed, then the signature on Lucien's last letter. I did both. The colours were nearly identical. Both had a slight sheen, deep violet with iron gall undertones. Same ink, I said. Possibly. Possibly. Only ink, not paper. Wolfe beckoned Fritz, who entered silently. The envelope, Wolfe said. What do you make of the stock? Fritz took it with delicate hands. He sniffed once, then ran a finger along the back. Linen, he said. Northern, not Savannah. Cold-pressed. Weight, standard. Quality, moderate. Wolfe nodded. And Lucien's letter? Fritz turned it over. Rag paper, southern, laid finish. Notice the watermark. I leaned in. It read, Beaumont Cotton and Sons, Savannah. Fritz stepped back. Thank you, Wolfe said. Fritz vanished through the panel. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, what do we learn? That someone had access to Lucien's ink, but not his paper. Wolfe tilted his head. And? And they composed a letter using one and not the other. He nodded. And the shoes. They're wrong. Precisely. Wolfe turned to the fire. Would Lucian Weatherly leave the house in boots and end up drowned in bespoke shoes? No. Would he forget his pocket watch? No. Or his wallet? No. I sat. So who was in the water? That, Wolfe said, is what I would very much like to know. We sat in silence. Outside, a horn honked on 35th Street. Steam curled past the window glass like a tired exhale. Wolfe shifted. Clayton Weatherly, he said. Where is he now? In Manhattan. Hotel Gravier, registered under Harlan Van. Saul's trailing him. And Adele Myrick? Still at the Weatherly house. No movement. Wolfe poured beer from the bottle Fritz had left earlier. It hissed quietly. You understand, of course, he said, what this implies. That the will might be a cover. That the man who died might have had no will at all. And Josephine? She believes what she saw, but she may have been shown only what someone wanted her to see. He sipped. Shoes, he murmured. Do not lie. The fireplace crackled. I rose, stretched, and walked to the window. Wolfe, I said. Yes? If Lucien is alive, then the question becomes, why? The door rattled twice before I heard the full thud of Kramer's fist. Not a knock, not a ring, just 3 thick pounds on solid oak, followed by a muttered curse and a second thud for punctuation. I didn't rush. Wolfe had just poured the beer Fritz brought him, and I was in the middle of transferring notes from the Savannah Chronicle to Wolfe's case folder. Kramer didn't like to be kept waiting, which was exactly why Wolfe always made him wait. I opened the door to a face I knew better than my own in mirrors. Inspector Kramer, shoulders hunched in his tan overcoat, cigar clenched, and brows angled for battle. I'm not here for pleasantries, he said. You rarely are. Move, I stepped aside. He stomped in, puffing furiously. He marched past the hat rack without removing his coat, and didn't wait for an invitation before entering the office. Wolfe, he growled, whatever game you're playing with the Weatherly case, quit it. It's closed. Wolfe didn't rise. He didn't look up. He reached for the beer. Kramer bristled. You're interfering in an adjudicated death, a closed file. Don't think I haven't heard. Wolfe sipped, then placed the glass down precisely on the coaster. Inspector, you have entered my home with cigar smoke and indignation. Kindly explain yourself before continuing your tirade. You want me to explain? Fine. Kramer tossed a folded newspaper clipping onto the desk. "The ledger," he said. "Weatherly's will, suddenly revised. Now you're nosing around." Wolfe didn't touch the paper. He looked at it, then at Kramer. "I am conducting no investigation," he said. "I was consulted." "By who?" "That," Wolfe said calmly, "is none of your business." Kramer's mouth twitched. "I could make it my business." "You could," Wolfe replied. "You would waste time." I sat down near the corner and crossed one leg. "Inspector," I said, "can we offer you a beer?" He turned. "I don't want a beer. I want him to stay out of it." Wolfe reached into the file drawer and removed a manila envelope. "Very well. If you will sit for 5 minutes, I will make a demonstration." Kramer looked at the chair like it might explode. Then he grunted, stepped forward, and dropped himself into the red seat across the desk. Wolfe opened the envelope and removed a single photograph. He placed it in front of Kramer. Lucian Weatherly, 2 weeks before his death. Porch chair, pocketbook, one visible wrist, and, just barely, a shadow suggesting a second strap. Kramer leaned forward. "What am I looking at?" "2 watches," Wolfe said. "One visible, the second implied. Mr. Weatherly's pocket watch was never recovered." "That proves nothing." "No?" Wolfe picked up another sheet. "The coroner's report," he said. "Weatherly was found without watch, wallet, or identification. His Italian shoes were dry." "Dry?" "Bespoke. Clever brush shined." Kramer squinted. "And?" "His tailor says he left in boots." Kramer puffed. "You're making soup from shadows." Wolfe lifted a brow. "Then perhaps this will season it." He pulled another item from the envelope, a bank document. I handed it to Kramer. "Withdrawal slip," I said. "Lucian Weatherly, 12,000 Manhattan branch, day before his death." Kramer's cigar froze. "Never deposited?" "No," I said. "Cashier's check issued. Never cashed." He examined it. The name matched. The handwriting matched. Wolfe spoke. "A man does not update his will, withdraw a large sum, and then drown without a trace of intention." Kramer narrowed his eyes. "You think he faked it?" "I think," Wolfe said, "the corpse was a substitute." Silence held. The fire crackled. Kramer looked at me, then at the check, then back at Wolfe. "Why are you really in this?" "A client believes a crime was committed. She's a beneficiary. She has motive." "Not for murder," Wolfe said, "but perhaps someone else did." Kramer leaned back. The smoke from his cigar curled sideways. "You know how this looks?" "Of course." "I'll have to speak with Savannah." "You should." He stood. "This isn't official." "Nothing is," Wolfe said. Kramer paused at the threshold. "Anyone tips me you're withholding, you'll storm in again," Wolfe finished. Kramer grunted and left. I waited for the door to click. Then Wolfe turned to me. "Saul," he said. I picked up the phone. Saul answered on the 3rd ring. "Follow Clayton Weatherly," Wolfe instructed. "Registered as Harold Van, Gravier Hotel." "Got it," Saul said. The line went quiet. 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. I answered. Saul's voice was crisp. "Clayton left the hotel at 10:18, took a cab to Bryant Park, walked south." "Alone?" "Met Kemba on Madison. They sat on a bench." "Did they speak?" "No. Kemba handed him a book, brown leather, thin, wrapped." "What happened?" "They left in opposite directions. Van Clayton entered the Equinox Club. Kemba disappeared into the subway." "Keep eyes on Van." "Always." I hung up. Wolfe opened a new sheet of paper and wrote a name. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "get a book from the shelf. Criminal Evidence in Probate Matters." I did. He opened to a chapter. "Page 214, he murmured. "Falsified Will Transfer Protocol." I looked at him. "Do you believe Kemba passed a forgery?" "I believe," Wolfe said, "he passed something he did not want copied." "And Van?" "Carries it until needed." He sat back, steepling his fingers. "The stage is set." "For what?" "For a dead man's encore." Josephine Weatherly arrived just after the second beer, with her gloves neatly folded, and a tension in her walk that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Fritz had just cleared the last of the lunch plates, and Wolfe, as usual, hadn't moved from his chair. She wore a navy blue suit cut close at the shoulders, Hemmed to the knee and pinned to the lapel was a brooch I hadn't seen before. Oval, gold-toned, with a fine inlay of mother-of-pearl set beneath a filigree of bramble leaves. "Miss Weatherly," I said as I opened the door. "You're nearly punctual. Mr. Wolfe appreciates discipline." She offered me a tight smile. "Habit from childhood. If you were late to dinner in our house, you missed dinner." I escorted her in. Wolfe didn't rise. She took the red chair without waiting for invitation and crossed one leg over the other in a motion I assumed was practiced. I followed and sat near the edge of the desk. "Mr. Wolfe," she said quietly, "I found these in the desk drawer in Lucien's study." She placed a bundle of letters on the blotter, pale blue stationery, tied with a thin strand of white silk ribbon. Her hands lingered. "I hadn't seen them until this morning. I had to convince the staff to unlock the drawer." Wolfe made a non-committal sound. "Letters?" "Yes, most of them unmailed." "How many?" "7. "And the brooch?" Wolfe asked, tone suddenly sharpening. She blinked. "What?" "The brooch," Wolfe repeated. "You did not wear it previously." She touched it. "No, it was my mother's." Wolfe made a noise not far from a grunt. Then he tapped the bell. Fritz appeared a moment later. Wolfe turned. "The Oxford Catalogue," he said. "Volume 2, section on post-war European design." Fritz raised a brow but left without comment. Josephine frowned. "I assure you, no need," Wolfe said mildly. "But I detest sentiment poorly anchored in fact." She reddened slightly but said nothing. I reached across and gently untied the ribbon on the letter stack. The top one was addressed, in violet ink, to Miss Pamela Roy. "Do you know her?" I asked. Josephine shook her head. "No, I've never heard the name." I scanned the first paragraph. Wolfe gestured. "Read it aloud." I cleared my throat. "My dearest morning star, each night passes slower than the last, and though I breathe and function and speak the necessary lies to the necessary people, none of it means a damn until I see you again." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Charming," he said. "Continue." I skimmed ahead. He goes on to describe a small cottage, presumably in Savannah. Mentions a red key hidden behind the ledger shelf and a particular orchid she admired in the window. The last line reads, "I do not care about inheritance or propriety or the Weatherly name, only that you believe I meant it. Signed simply, Lucien." Josephine's expression was unreadable. "Would you like me to stop?" "No," she said. "Please go on." I moved through the second letter. A repeat of the same sentiment, but with more desperation. Mentions of a plan, of wanting to disappear properly. "She's not referenced in any of the estate documents," Josephine said quietly. "Not in his journal or in the account ledgers. Not even in the will." Wolfe's voice was dry. He didn't want her remembered that way. Fritz returned with the catalogue. Wolfe accepted it, flipped to the marked section, then angled the spine open. He pointed. "Archie." I stood and leaned over. The image was close, almost identical. Oval frame, inlaid pearl, thorn-brushed gold with central bramble leaf design. "Here," Wolfe said, "page 214, Franz Hartmann, Vienna, 1947, series of 20 brooches, post-war series titled Regrowth." Josephine paled. No, that can't be. My mother never left Georgia." Wolfe turned to her. "She didn't need to. You found it in Lucien's desk." Her voice was soft. "Yes." "Among the letters." She looked down. "Yes." Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "Then it is not your mother's brooch." Josephine sat rigid. "Lucien kept it, alongside these letters." "Yes." "Which means—" "That it belonged to her," Wolfe said. "Pamela Roy." Josephine swallowed. "So he lied to me?" "No," Wolfe said. "He didn't tell you anything. You lied to yourself." She looked away, but her jaw was tight. I returned to the letters. Number 3 referenced a medical condition. He was worried for her lungs. Something about cold air in the mornings and refusing to wear the scarf he bought her. Number 4 thanked her for the pressed flower she sent and swore to keep it in his wallet. Wolfe sat forward. "In his wallet?" "Yes." "The one that was never recovered." I nodded. Josephine murmured, "It was never found." "Convenient," Wolfe replied. Letter 5 had no date. but the handwriting was rushed, the words strained, edges blotted. He says he's afraid of them, that he saw Adele reading his desk drawer and suspects Clayton knows about Pamela. I looked at her. Josephine closed her eyes. They knew, she whispered. They must have. Letter 6 was addressed not to Pamela, but to the housekeeper at Roy's last residence. Wolfe lifted a brow. Which means? She vanished, I said. Pamela Roy left, and Lucien tried to trace her. Josephine opened her eyes. I never knew. He never said her name. The final letter wasn't sealed, no address, but it had only 5 words. The key is under the grate. Wolfe leaned back, then slowly forward again. He pressed his fingertips together. There's a ghost in this house, Miss Weatherly. She said nothing. She was loved, Wolfe said, perhaps more than anyone else in his life, but she was hidden, and now she is missing. I looked at the letters again. Do we know if Pamela Roy is alive? No, Wolfe said. But if she is, she knows the truth. Josephine turned toward the fire. And if she's dead? Wolfe didn't answer. The flames cracked softly. He reached for his beer. Mr. Goodwin? Yes. Find her. Pamela Roy? Yes. Any preference for method? Alive first, dead if necessary. I nodded. Miss Weatherly, Wolfe said gently, you will leave the brooch here. She hesitated, then unpinned it slowly, laid it beside the letters and stood. I didn't know, she said. Truly. I believe you. She turned. I wanted something of my mother's, she said, voice brittle. I wanted it to mean something. Then find her, Wolfe said, and learn what Lucien meant. She didn't look back. When the door closed behind her, Wolfe leaned forward. We've spent days asking who killed Lucien Weatherly, he said. Yes. Perhaps it is time, Wolfe murmured, to ask who he died for. The wind off the East River had teeth that afternoon. I'd finished at Bellevue and was walking west on 30th with a folder tucked under my coat like it held stolen state secrets. In a way, it did. Not the kind you could sell, but the kind you couldn't forget once read. Back at the brownstone, I handed the folder to Wolfe without a word. He didn't glance up from his beer. He reached, opened, and sifted as if he were separating spoiled radishes from the batch. Pamela Roy, I said, employed at St. Luke's in 1946, assigned to private recovery for a Lucien Calgrove after a leg fracture and minor lung trauma. Injury from a boating accident, though a notation reads gunpowder residue left thigh. She resigned 3 months later. Wolfe grunted, not displeased, more the sound of a man who'd found the first thread in a knot. She never submitted a forwarding address, but Roosevelt Clinic had a nurse named Roy, transferred from St. Luke's in late 46, only there 4 months. Wolfe turned a page. Let me guess, no exit record. None, I said. But a nurse who worked there then is still on staff. She remembered Pamela Roy, said she wore gloves, all year, cotton in July, silk in August. She was hiding something, Wolfe muttered. Or hiding from, I said. That earned a lift of the brows. I took the red chair. She disappears in 47. No tax record, no city directory listing, no marriage license, no obituary. It's like she peeled off the map. A map, Wolfe said, of no country. That was poetic for him. He reached for his beer. Fritz appeared a moment later with coffee for me and slices of cold roast for Wolfe. The room settled into that strange brownstone rhythm, quiet but alert. Wolfe leaned back, the folder open across his belly like a ledger of sins. There's something else, I said, after a minute. Adele Myrick. Saul tracked her today. Wolfe didn't stir. He called. Midtown Bank and Trust, corner of 45th and Lex. She rented a safety deposit box under her name last year, renewed it this March. Today, she checked it. And? Saul had been thorough. He'd trailed her from her apartment to the bank lobby, watched her disappear into the vault level. 21 minutes later, she emerged holding nothing, expression unreadable. He sweet-talked a clerk, I said. The box contained multiple passports, all hers, different surnames, one Belgian, one French, one American, all issued in the last 10 years. Not illegal, Wolfe said. Curious, but not illegal. And a deed, I added, to a small cottage, Sag Harbor, purchased 5 years ago. Wolfe's lips pressed together. She planned to vanish, I said. She planned, he echoed, which suggests motive, opportunity, possibly preparation. But does it suggest guilt? I didn't answer. The question was meant to hang. He closed the folder and gestured toward the globe in the corner. I rose, spun it to France, then stopped near the Swiss border. He squinted. Irrelevant, I smirked. She speaks French. And German, he sniffed. Many do. But not many also plan an exit route. Wolfe drummed his fingers on the leather folder. Did Saul acquire photographs? One of the passports has a likeness. Same woman, same cheek scar. That's her. Show me. I retrieved the envelope from my pocket. Wolfe didn't touch it. He let me slide the print across the desk. He stared for a long time, then exhaled slowly. That, he said, is not a woman who intended to stay in New York. No? She was ready, Wolfe said, long before Lucien died. And she didn't cry when he did, I added. He turned the photo over, blank. She knew it was coming, I said. Did she help it come? Wolfe murmured. There was no music in the room, just the tick of the clock and the low whir of the radiator. The photo lay on Wolfe's desk like a telegram no one had the nerve to send. Archie, Wolfe said, I want the timeline of Lucien's decline. I'd memorized it. Injury in 46, I began. Pamela Roy attends him privately for 3 months. After she disappears, Lucien becomes reclusive. Public appearances drop off. No major business transactions from 48 onward. By 51, he rarely leaves his residence. Heart issues mentioned in a private physician's report last year. Dead in May. Official cause. Cerebral thrombosis. Wolfe snorted. Convenient. Still plausible. Wolfe nodded. Have Saul keep eyes on Adele. No contact yet. No pressure. I want to know if she goes near that cottage. I nodded. And Miss Roy, he said. If she's still alive, I said, she doesn't want to be found. Wolfe picked up the photo again. She may not have a choice. That evening, I visited Roosevelt Clinic. It was a narrow building on 59th, not far from the tramway. Its lobby smelled of antiseptic and carpet glue. The night desk nurse was soft-spoken, mid-50s, with a manner like a librarian guarding her first edition Austen. I'm looking for someone who might have worked here in 1946, I said, laying down my card. She adjusted her glasses. That was before my time. Still, I said, you've got records. She pursed her lips. Limited. I waited. Eventually she returned with a cloth-bound book. No cover, just a thick ledger of names, wards, and staff assignments. I scanned. Roy, P. Ward 3, night shift, October 46 to Jan 47. I pointed. Any notes? A column beside the name read, Transferred, no file. Did anyone mention her? I asked. She tilted her head. Eileen, our longest here. She's downstairs in admin. She was a trainee back then. 5 minutes later, I was shaking hands with a tall woman in a cardigan the colour of rust. Pamela Roy, I said. She blinked, then smiled faintly. Wore gloves, even in July. She say why? Just said it felt proper. Always used the side entrance, took her meals in the storage closet, not the break room. Odd? Not impolite, just like she didn't want to be seen too long. Accented? No, flat vowels, probably Midwestern. Friends? None that I saw, but a postman used to wait outside for her, every Tuesday. She never acknowledged him. Could you describe him? She frowned. Tall, narrow face, limp on the left. Might have been military. Lucien Calgrove had a limp on the left, from the hunting accident. I thanked her. Back in the cab, I called Saul from a payphone on Madison. She's not at her apartment, he said. Left around noon, hasn't returned. Where? Midtown, then East Side. Small brown suitcase, pale gloves. Not travelling clothes. Still watching? From across the street. Good, I said. Don't lose her. When I returned to the brownstone, Fritz was watering the ferns in the front alcove. He nodded once and resumed trimming a drooping violet leaf. Wolfe was in the office. He didn't speak, just pointed to the corner. A deed lay unfolded beneath a magnifying glass. Sag Harbor, dated 6 years prior, signed in a hand I didn't recognize. Adele purchased it, Wolfe said, using the name Adrielle Mons. Not her legal name? No, he said. A cousin's name, Deceased in 1931. I leaned in. What else? Cash transaction, no mortgage, no banking trail. She meant to vanish, I said. Yes. Alone? He didn't answer. I moved to the window. The trees on 35th Street rattled their bare fingers in the wind. Wolfe, I said, what if Pamela Roy was never her real name? It likely wasn't. She disappears after caring for Lucian. Then Adele emerges. Same limp, same man. You're suggesting a link. I'm suggesting a substitute. He turned. You believe Adele Myrick may have been Pamela Roy? Or vice versa. He stared at the photo. They look nothing alike. Plastic surgery. In 1947, possible. Not likely. She might have dyed her hair, lost weight, gained it, changed posture. He sat back. No. Adele Myrick has social roots in New York dating back to 1950. Pamela Roy vanished in 47. If they're the same woman, the disguise is older than her friendships. She could have planted the friendships. Wolfe grunted. This is not a novel, Mr. Goodwin. No, I said, but it's a damn clever trick. He raised a brow. What if Pamela Roy disappeared because she became someone else? He leaned back. That would explain Adele's preparation. And her silence, he nodded once. Get me the Sag Harbor deed, he said, and call Inspector Kramer. What for? To ask, he said, if any deaths were recorded in Sag Harbor under suspicious circumstances in 1947. Why 1947? Because that's when Pamela Roy ceased to exist. I made the call. Kramer's office answered on the third ring. He was in, grumbling but curious. Death records? He barked. You think I'm the library? I think you have access. There was a long pause, then, you looking into someone? Pamela Roy vanished in 47. Where? Possibly Sag Harbor. He huffed. You're not the only one asking about her. I froze. What do you mean? Had a man up here last week, Kramer said. Older. Tall, German accent. Said he was writing a memoir. Wanted records from 46 to 50. Narrowed on female deaths with no kin. What name? He signed in as Rupert Klein. Sound familiar? Should it? I felt a chill. Rupert Klein was Lucian's estate lawyer. Retired? Supposedly. Kramer cursed. He's playing at something. Yes. You want those records or not? Everything from Sag Harbor, I said. Female, no kin, 1946 to 1948. He hung up without another word. I turned to Wolfe. Lucian's lawyer, I said. He's digging. Wolfe tapped a finger against the armrest. Digging, he repeated. For what? For her, I said. Wolfe stared at the fire. Then he knows. All suspects? He rose slowly. That always meant the wheels were moving faster than the pace suggested. I want Adele here, he said. She won't come. Then bring her. How? Bait. I raised an eyebrow. She left the passports, but not the deed. It's missing. Gone? From the box. Saul didn't say. He didn't know. He never saw inside. You had a clerk? I had Fritz make a call. I blinked. She returned 5 hours after Saul left, Wolfe said. Retrieved the deed. Alone. What now? Now, he said, you find her and tell her Lucian's lawyer is making inquiries. Why would that matter? Wolfe turned. Because if she helped Lucian die, and if Pamela Roy knew it, then someone's tying up loose ends. I nodded. And Adele thinks she's the last thread. Wolfe tapped the folder once, then sat down. Find her. I put on my coat and hat. Outside, the wind was louder, like the city had opinions. I walked east toward Lexington, where Saul was parked under a street lamp, reading the Times like a man paid by the paragraph. She's inside, he said, gesturing across the street. 3rd floor, no lights for an hour. I nodded. She still have the suitcase? Don't know. I crossed. The buzzer didn't answer. I waited. A tenant came down with a basket of laundry and didn't question my entry. I moved up 3 flights, found her door and knocked once. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. The door opened a crack, not enough to see her face. Yes? I stepped back. Miss Myrick, I need a word. I'm not Pamela Roy, I said. Lucian's lawyer has been asking about you. Silence. Then slowly the door opened. She stood there, gloves on, even indoors. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "You do," I said. She looked tired, not frightened, just tired. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," I said. "But if you want to say, now's the time." She studied me. "Why do you care?" "I don't," I said. "But Wolfe does, and Lucian might have, once." She didn't flinch, but she stepped aside. "5 minutes," she said. I walked in. The room smelled of lavender and steam. On the table sat a small velvet pouch, next to it a key, and beneath that, a photograph of Lucien, wearing gloves, even in summer. It began, as these things sometimes do, with a steamer trunk. Not a common one, mind you, not the battered sort from second-rate ocean liners with rope scars and dented brass corners. This one was a relic. English oak, dark as coffee, with iron-bound edges and a hand-etched weatherly plaque riveted beneath the latch. Josephine brought it to the brownstone herself, arriving precisely on time. Fritz opened the door just far enough to confirm her identity, before admitting her into the front room. I was already waiting, coat still on, hands tucked in pockets. Wolfe naturally remained upstairs among his orchids, where human commotion was unwelcome before lunch. She didn't waste time. "It was Lucien's," she said, gesturing to the trunk. "Came from his estate in Aix. I don't know why it was sent here, but I thought—" Her voice trailed off. I nodded once and crouched beside it, running a hand over the old brass latches. The lock was intact but loose in its housing. I pressed both catches and lifted the lid. The scent was immediate. Dust, varnish, old paper. A whisper of lavender, faint and dry. Inside, 2 wool blankets folded crisply, a tin box with a worn monogram, and a leather wallet tucked into the side panel, its edge just visible behind the inner lining. That lining, I noticed, had been tampered with. I said nothing to Josephine, only closed the trunk gently and rose. "I'll inventory the contents," I said. "Wolfe will want them in sequence." She gave a brittle nod. "Call me if anything seems amiss." We watched her leave, Fritz with a bow, I with narrowed eyes. She carried herself like someone trying to forget something, and failing. Upstairs, Wolfe received the trunk's existence with a sigh and a dismissive flick of the wrist. "Put it in the office. I'll examine it once orchids are attended to." That gave me 30 minutes. More than enough. I pulled the wallet free. It was dark brown, smooth-grained, with French stitching and a faded silver clasp. The outer flap bore faint indentations, old pressure marks from cards or coins long since removed. Inside, most of it was empty. No cash, no documents. Just 2 crumbling receipts and a folded slip of paper written in cursive too ornate for anything recent. And behind the inner pocket, wedged tight, a laundry stub. I squinted. Ink faded. But the date was legible. 2 days after Lucien's supposed drowning. And the address? Pinecrest Cleaners, East 81st Street. I whistled through my teeth and rose. Wolfe would want to see the stub himself. But first, I needed to see the cleaner. East 81st was quiet when I arrived. Afternoon haze hung low between the buildings, and a delivery truck idled at the corner. Pinecrest Cleaners was narrow, unassuming. Bell over the door, yellowed blinds. I stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked like he'd been pressed and folded with yesterday's shirts. Lean, tired, eyes half closed. "Help you?" he asked, voice raspy. I slid the stub across the counter. Came from a Weatherly trunk, belonged to Lucien Neerhoff, died in July. I want to know what this was for. He took the slip with 2 fingers, held it to the light, and sniffed. "Suit," he muttered. 3-piece, midnight wool. Came in damp, like it had been stored wrong. We returned it the following week. "To who?" He scratched his jaw. "Guy who dropped it off. Said his name was Roy. Luke Roy." That name again. "Do you still have the clothes?" He gave a grunt. "Not here. We send unclaimed backstock to the warehouse. Give me 20 minutes. I nodded. Outside, I smoked a lucky and leaned on the hydrant. 23 minutes later, he returned with a sealed canvas bag. I paid the retrieval fee and took it straight back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in his chair by then. Yellow upholstery, freshly brushed. The trunk sat by the fireplace. I opened the bag carefully. The suit was there, immaculate as promised. Midnight wool, subtle pinstripe, double-vented. I ran my hands over the inner lining, slow and steady. There, stitched near the hem of the left interior breast pocket, something tugged. I reached for Wolfe's letter opener and slit the thread. Inside, a folded receipt. Faded, torn at one corner, but legible. Wolfe held out a hand. I passed it over. He examined it under the desk lamp. "Violet ink," he murmured. His tone changed, just slightly, the way it does when a theory stops being hypothetical. "Initials," he said. "P.R." "Pamela Roy?" I asked. "Presumably. And here," he flipped the paper. "A ferry stub, Eastport Line, departure 2 days after Lucien's alleged drowning." I sat. "So, Lucien didn't drown." Wolfe didn't answer. He placed the receipt on the desk, aligned it perfectly with the corner blotter, and exhaled through his nose. "Miss Roy," he said, "was a nurse. She vanished in 1946. We know she wore gloves even in summer. We know she accompanied Lucien during his convalescence. And we know," I added, "that Adele Myrick kept multiple passports and a deed in Sag Harbor." Wolfe didn't blink. "I no longer doubt it. Lucien never drowned. Someone else died in his place." I rose. "I'll check ferry records." He nodded once, eyes closed. Manhattan Ferry Authority kept handwritten logs. The man at the dock wore a cap too big for his skull and whistled through his teeth while writing. I handed him the stub. "Need to know who took the 8:15 to Eastport, August 4th. He flipped through the register, licked a thumb, turned another page. There. Solo ticket. Paid cash. Name, Luke Roy. I tipped him $1 and walked back into the light, chewing the inside of my cheek. Luke Roy, Lucien Neerhoff, alias, fragment, reconstruction, or all three. Back at the brownstone, I laid the stub on Wolfe's blotter. He adjusted his glasses, read it once, then again aloud. Luke Roy. He leaned back. "The dead man," he said, "was a substitute." He said nothing more, but he didn't need to. Outside, dusk thickened. Fritz brought the beer. Wolfe sipped once, then with a soft grunt reached for the receipt again. He folded it carefully as if it might crack from age. I cleared my throat. "Who was it then?" "Who?" Wolfe asked. "The one who died, if not Lucien." Wolfe didn't answer. He merely stared out the window, as if somewhere in the quiet geometry of 35th Street lay the shape of a corpse whose name we hadn't yet heard. I left him like that, quiet, still, unsatisfied. And in the fireplace behind me, the scent of old lavender lingered. The only sound in the room was the hush of the radiator behind Wolfe's desk. Steam ticked inside its ribs like a nervous watch. Wolfe sat as he always did, back firm against the yellow leather, fingers steepled under his chin, while Inspector Kramer stood with one hand on his hip and the other resting on the chair's carved frame, refusing to sit. Between them, on Wolfe's blotter, lay a single photograph. The edges were curled. The ink had started to fade. "He didn't drown," Wolfe said quietly. Kramer's brow twitched. "You're telling me Lucien Neerhoff, the Lucien Neerhoff, isn't dead?" Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "I am telling you, he made arrangements to be presumed so." I leaned on the far corner of Wolfe's desk, arms crossed. "We've traced the paper trail, starting with the forged signature on the letter to Josephine, and ending with a ferry stub in the name Luke Roy, one of Lucien's pseudonyms during a hospital convalescence 5 years ago." Wolfe lifted one hand. Lucien staged his own death. The body that washed ashore in Montauk was a proxy, likely a man coerced or paid handsomely to assume his identity in death. "Coerced how?" Kramer asked. "Hard to say," I replied. "The autopsy showed no struggle, no trauma. Drowning clean. But the shoes were 2 sizes too large, and the molars didn't match the dental record filed by Neerhoff's insurance in 47. "Then why vanish?" Kramer asked. "Why stage the whole performance?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "Because Lucien uncovered a conspiracy, one in which he was the intended casualty." Kramer shifted his weight. "You're serious?" "I'm not prone to frivolity," Wolfe said. He tapped the photograph. Clayton Hartzell, Lucien's attorney, had full access to the will. He knew Josephine was named sole heir. He also knew Adele Myrick, Lucien's former secretary and former mistress, was in possession of documents she claimed were newly amended instructions. These included an unsigned codicil naming Adele as executor. but there was no ink trail, no proper witnesses, and the only typist who could have authenticated the draft, Miss Roy, disappeared in 1946. Kramer ran a hand down his jaw. Wolfe continued. Lucian planned to disappear, but something interfered, likely betrayal. Either Hartzell or Adele accelerated the plan before Lucian was ready. The man who died was not Lucian, but someone dressed and prepared to be mistaken for him. I spoke up. The name on the ferry stub was Luke Roy. That was Lucian's alias during his rehab stay after the hunting accident. Pamela Roy was the nurse, and she vanished the same year Lucian stopped appearing in society. Wolfe said, Lucian trusted two people, Miss Roy and possibly Josephine. The others? No. Kramer's voice dropped. You have proof of Adele and Hartzell's involvement? Wolfe gestured to the stack of papers I'd just compiled. I passed them across. Bank transfer from Adele's personal account to an Argentine fund under Clayton's legal entity. The account was opened 3 weeks before the presumed drowning. Saul followed Clayton to a consulate. He's booked a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires. Leaves Wednesday. Kramer flipped pages, whistled low. Hell. Wolfe didn't blink. There is also the matter of the Sag Harbor deed. Adele kept it in a Midtown deposit box under her maiden name. The documents name her as co-owner with an unnamed male party. Dates match the week of Lucian's disappearance. And you think Josephine's at risk, Kramer said. Wolfe shifted in his chair. If Josephine is the last legitimate heir, then yes. She now holds the legal claim to the Weatherly fortune. That makes her an inconvenience. I'll need to put eyes on her, Kramer said. I nodded. She's been staying at the Barbizon since the will got read. She hasn't left since yesterday. Kramer tucked the documents into a slim leather folder. I can get warrants for Clayton and Adele by tomorrow morning. I'll assign protection to Josephine tonight. He looked up. But if Lucian's alive, where is he? Wolfe closed his eyes again. That, he said, is the one truth we do not yet possess. There was a silence, a dense one. Kramer finally turned to the door. I'll have Adele picked up before breakfast. Wolfe inclined his head once. When the door closed behind him, Wolfe exhaled slowly. I stood and moved toward the bookshelf, mostly out of habit. You think Lucian's watching all this? Wolfe didn't answer right away. He picked up the Montenegrin glass from the side table and turned it in his fingers. If he's alive, Wolfe said at last, he'll wait. That's what cowards do. The phrase surprised me. It wasn't a word Wolfe used often. I frowned. You think he ran to avoid fighting for the company? I think he ran, Wolfe said, because he no longer trusted the ground beneath him, and perhaps because he no longer trusted himself. I watched him for a beat. You believe Josephine didn't know? He nodded once. She wrote to him weekly. Her letters were returned unopened. That's not the action of someone complicit. I rubbed my jaw. Wolfe, I said, what about Pamela Roy? He looked up. Dead? I asked. Or with him? I suspect, he said slowly. She is the only one who truly knows. Outside, Manhattan had gone quiet. The kind of still that made you think it might snow, even in late October. Inside, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes again. A long silence settled over the room. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he murmured, We must not forget, Mr. Goodwin. Money is a motive, but fear is a trigger. I sat down. Somewhere behind us, Fritz turned off the light in the kitchen. The train pulled into Bridgehampton at 11:43. Josephine Claymore stepped down from the last car, glancing at the folded note in her gloved hand. It had arrived by courier that morning, addressed in a precise looping script. Lucian's final letter. Sag Harbor, noon. Do not bring anyone. I'd seen it before she did. Wolfe had intercepted the envelope after it was slipped under the door, and he'd read the contents without blinking. He didn't like anonymous notes, and he liked last letters even less. But he had nodded once, slow and grave. Follow her, he'd said. Do not intervene unless her life is in danger. Which is how I ended up crouched in a patch of dry reeds 50 yards from the sea-facing cottage, breathing salt air and watching the wind flick the shutters. The place was older than the war, painted pale green and white, with a wraparound porch that creaked even when no one walked on it. It sat on a thin spit of land north of the marina, its rear windows staring down the bay like vacant eyes. Josephine reached the cottage alone. She wore a dark wool coat and a burgundy cloche hat. Her heels clicked softly against the porch wood. She knocked once, waited, then turned the knob. She disappeared inside. My instructions hadn't changed. I held my position, but my hand moved without thinking to the inside pocket of my coat. The pistol there was small and clean, and I had checked the safety twice. At 12:10, Adele Warburton arrived. She pulled up in a dusty cream Packard, paused to examine the lane, and got out holding a leather handbag too large for casual errands. She moved like someone exhausted, not from distance but from conscience. Her coat was open, and her face was taut around the mouth. I watched her climb the steps slowly, knock once and enter. Still, I stayed put. But not for long. 12:27. A black Hudson roared down the sand road in a storm of dust. It braked hard, skewed, and the door opened before the engine had stopped. Clayton Emery. No disguise, no hesitation. He didn't knock. He went in like he owned it. That broke my timer. I waited 2 minutes more, then rose. The front porch groaned as I approached. The air smelled like brine and old rope. A gull shrieked once high above. I pulled my coat tighter, stepped up to the door and tried the handle. Unlocked. I entered quietly. Inside, the house was dim, lit only by the grey sheen of noon through salt-specked glass. The parlour opened directly off the entrance, a wide, low-ceilinged room with wicker chairs, a stone fireplace, and books piled on crates. No fire, no voices. I moved down the hall. The voices came from the back, near the kitchen. I recognised Josephine's first. "You lied. You both lied. He's dead, isn't he?" Then Adele, tight, controlled. "We didn't kill him, I swear to you. We never intended—" "You lured me here," Josephine snapped. "He wanted to protect you," Adele said. "That's why he staged the accident. He was in danger. He knew too much." "And now he's gone," Josephine said flatly. "Gone," Clayton said, his voice breaking in. "Because he panicked. He had to vanish. He betrayed all of us." I stepped forward until I could see them, the three of them clustered around the dining table. Josephine stood nearest the window. Her posture was defiant, but I saw her knuckles white on the chair back. Adele was seated, her eyes darting between them. Clayton leaned against the doorframe, his hand near his coat. Not on it. Near. "Who is all of us?" Josephine asked. Clayton opened his mouth. Adele reached out. "Don't," she said. Josephine's voice rose. "You wrote that note." "No," Adele said. "You lured me here." "No," Adele said again. "Clayton did." Clayton looked at her, something sharp behind his eyes. "She deserved answers," he said. "You said that yourself." Adele swallowed. "Not this way." Clayton's voice shifted. "You wanted her gone. So did Lucien. So did everyone in that godforsaken house. Don't pretend you were the saint." "I never wanted her hurt. She's the last obstacle." There it was. Josephine stepped back. Her hand found her purse, but not in time. Clayton's hand came up, and from the coat a pistol appeared. It was small, matte black, but not quiet. "I won't let you ruin everything," he said. "You won't shoot her," Adele said. He didn't answer. Josephine stood still. I stepped in. "Let's test that theory." They all turned. Clayton blinked once. The pistol shifted, but not toward me. Not yet. "Archie Goodwin," I said, "private investigator. Armed, annoyed, and authorized." Clayton said nothing. I took a step. My own pistol was in my hand, pointed low. "Drop it." Clayton hesitated. Then, from behind the house, a new sound. Sirens. They weren't far. Kramer had arrived. Clayton's eyes widened. His finger twitched. "Don't," I said. For a moment I thought he might test fate. Then Adele reached out and grabbed his arm. He twisted, furious. But the distraction was enough. I closed the distance and knocked the pistol from his hand with one practiced motion. It clattered across the linoleum and under the table. Josephine gasped. Adele fell back. Clayton lunged. I dodged, stepped behind, and hooked his shoulder hard. He stumbled into a chair. "Sit," I said. He did. The front door banged open. Kramer entered with 2 uniforms, his coat still flapping. His eyes swept the room. He saw Josephine, then Clayton, then me. "Goodwin." "Inspector." He glanced at Adele. "You?" She nodded once. Kramer turned to the officers. "Take them both." "On what charge?" Clayton barked. "Suspicion of conspiracy to commit fraud," Kramer said, "and attempted murder. We'll sort the rest later. Josephine sat down heavily, her hat tilted forward. Kramer looked at me. You all right? Fine, he gestured. We'll sweep the place. Don't leave town. To think I'd want to, I said. He snorted and turned to go. The uniforms hauled Clayton and Adele out. I walked to Josephine. You're safe now, I said. She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but her voice cracked. Is he dead? I paused. Wolfe doesn't think so. Then where is he? That, I said, is still missing. We left the house together. The wind had picked up. Over the bay, gulls wheeled and cried. Somewhere out there, a man was still unaccounted for. And Wolfe did not like unfinished business. It was just past 6, and the lamplight had taken over the office. Outside, the streets wore a thin veil of mist, and the sound of a distant horn curled through the window like an afterthought. Wolfe was seated, his bulk settled into the yellow chair like a final chapter. He hadn't spoken in 12 minutes. I, meanwhile, had the steamer trunk open again. We'd already been through it, twice, but Wolfe had insisted, with that quiet authority that made a second inspection feel like an act of redemption. I'd removed every item, the folded gowns, the wrapped perfume bottles, the cracked photograph of a harbour. Nothing new. Until my hand pressed against the interior seam of the base, there was a give, a quiet, imperceptible click. I pulled. A false bottom slid upward, cleverly fitted, lacquered to match the interior, invisible unless you were looking for it. I tilted it toward the light. Inside were 2 objects, a small velvet pouch and an undeveloped roll of black and white film. I didn't speak right away. Wolfe, of course, already knew. I handed him the pouch. He opened it carefully. Inside was a pocket watch, gold, thick and ornately engraved. On the back, Lucian Densmore's initials. I'd seen it once in a photograph. Pamela had said he never took it off. Until now. Wolfe turned the watch over once, then set it aside. He didn't ask for the film. He knew it would take me 20 minutes to develop it. I headed to the darkroom. By the time I returned, the photos were clipped to dry, 4 in total. The first showed Lucian Densmore standing by a whitewashed cottage with green shutters smoking a cigarette. He wore a light summer jacket and looked relaxed. His wristwatch, the same one, gleamed in the light. The second showed Pamela Roy seated on a porch chair, wrapped in a shawl, reading a paperback. The timestamp in the corner was dated 2 days after Lucian's supposed death. The third and fourth showed them together. In one, he was handing her something. In the last, she was laughing, genuinely, warmly. The date was clear. I laid them in front of Wolfe. He didn't blink. She never left, he said. I nodded. She waited. Yes. But he never came back. No, Wolfe said. He didn't. The silence that followed wasn't theatrical. It was weighted. She died at Bellevue, Wolfe said softly. 3 months later. Pneumonia. Under a false name. I stared at the photos. She thought he'd come back. She believed, Wolfe said, in promises not meant to be kept. I sat down. Josephine Claymore was already there in the red client chair nearest the fireplace. She hadn't spoken since I returned. But now, her voice broke the stillness. Why? She whispered. No one answered. She leaned forward slightly. Her gloves were still on, her handbag beside her on the floor. She could have disappeared, she said. Started over. Why wait? Wolfe's voice was low. Because she loved him. And he, her, at least in part. Josephine's eyes didn't leave the photographs. She reached out, touched one, then withdrew her hand. Her chin lowered, shoulders tensed, and very quietly, she wept. Not the kind of sobs you see in pictures. No shaking, no sounds. Just a breath that hitched and eyes that finally closed. Neither of us moved. After a minute, Wolfe picked up the brooch. He had examined it once before, under magnification. A simple silver piece, shaped like a rose. Pamela had worn it in several photos. We had taken it for a sentimental keepsake. Now, Wolfe turned it over, pressed at the hinge and twisted. A soft snap. Inside the clasp, a strip of microfilm. He removed it with a pair of tweezers and held it up. Legible? I asked. He nodded. A copy, he said, of Lucian's amended will. Josephine looked up. Wolfe leaned forward. He had planned to destroy the original and vanish with Pamela, but he never made it back to the cottage. Someone reached him first. This, he tapped the microfilm, is what they feared. Josephine said nothing. Wolfe set the brooch down. Your inheritance, he said quietly, was real and intended. She stared at him. No one told me, she said. No, Wolfe said, because it was never about you. It was about escape. The will threatened that, and so it vanished, or tried to. Josephine pressed a hand to her cheek. She waited, she said again, all that time. Wolfe gave a single nod. She died alone, Josephine whispered. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. She was not the first, he said, nor will she be the last. I watched Josephine rise. She straightened her coat, picked up her handbag and smoothed her hair with one gloved hand. She didn't ask for the photographs. She didn't take the brooch. She walked to the door, paused and turned. She loved him, she said. Yes, Wolfe replied. She nodded once, and then she left. The room was silent again. Wolfe picked up the pocket watch and set it on the edge of his desk. The ticking, faint and steady, filled the space she had left behind. It was nearing 7 when I returned to the brownstone, the wind pressing against my coat like a second skin. I'd been at the ferry office since 4, sifting through manifests and scribbled log entries until my eyes rebelled. Wolfe hadn't stirred from his chair. The air smelled of beef ragout and pipe smoke. I crossed the room without a word and laid the carbon copy on his desk. He read it once, then again, then looked up. She was booked, I said. Name, cabin number, paid in full. Manhattan to Oyster Bay. Departure set for 11:15 p.m., the night before Lucien died. He turned the sheet over in one hand. Cancelled? Stamp across the bottom, I said. Illness. Documented? I nodded. Roosevelt Clinic. Nurse log confirms she arrived early evening with fever, was admitted overnight. No one notified the ferry line, they just no-showed her. Date of release? 2 days later. By then, Lucien Densmore was dead, Wolfe finished quietly. The quiet held. She wasn't supposed to live, I said. Or more precisely, she wasn't supposed to miss that boat. Wolfe gave a slow nod. The picture was sharpening, and it was grim. Kramer arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't knock. Fritz, as always, didn't open the door. The bell rang once, short and firm, and I answered. Kramer entered in a mood like approaching rain. His overcoat was still buttoned and his hat stayed on. He paused just past the threshold, scanned the room and met Wolfe's gaze. This had better be good. Wolfe inclined his head. It is. Kramer didn't sit right away. He stood behind the red chair, one hand on the backrest, the other fingering his lapel. I gestured. You'll want to hear this before you make any official statements. Kramer raised an eyebrow. Wolfe spoke. Adele Myrick and Clayton Weatherly planned to disappear with Lucien's estate. The will, of course, would be contested, but that mattered little, so long as the rightful heirs were gone. Gone, Kramer repeated. Dead, Wolfe said. Or absent. Preferably both. Kramer exhaled sharply through his nose. Wolfe gestured toward the sheet in his hand. Josephine Claymore, he said, was scheduled to board a ferry to Oyster Bay. A small cabin liner, discreet, lightly staffed. The manifest shows her name clearly. She never arrived, I added. Fell ill. Roosevelt Clinic logged her as an overnight admission. Fever, chills. They kept her until noon the next day. Kramer swore under his breath. She doesn't know? He asked. She suspects, Wolfe said, but has not pieced it together. Kramer looked down at the chair. She's coming? He asked. Wolfe nodded. A moment later the bell rang again. This time I answered with more caution. Josephine Claymore stood in the vestibule, wrapped in a grey coat, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. She stepped inside as if the air outside had decided not to keep her any longer. I took her coat and led her in. She saw Kramer and blinked, then Wolfe, then the photos I had left on the table, the ferry manifest, the clinic log, the ledger. She didn't sit. Wolfe's voice was steady. Miss Claymore, there is more. She stood with one hand on the back of the red chair, the other holding her handbag like a fragile secret. Wolfe folded his hands. You were meant to die. No preamble, no softening. She didn't move. They planned, Wolfe continued, to remove Lucien Densmore and any heirs likely to contest the estate. Pamela Roy was isolated. You were accessible. She took a breath, but it didn't quite reach her lungs. They arranged for your passage, Wolfe said. The ferry manifest confirms. Your name, your birth. I was never on it, she whispered. You were ill, Wolfe said. By chance, or perhaps not. Either way, Tom, you did not board. The opportunity passed. I stepped forward and handed her the manifest. She read it, slowly. I never knew, she said. Kramer was silent. They would have killed me, she asked. Wolfe inclined his head. No, that would require risk. They arranged for someone else to do it. An accident, a robbery gone wrong, a misstep. But yes, the outcome was meant to be fatal. She looked at Kramer. Why? She asked. The estate, Kramer said. Always the estate. Josephine sat, not abruptly, not dramatically, just folded inward. Her posture collapsed first, then her hands, then her eyes. Wolfe let the silence stretch. I could hear the clock. They didn't want the money, she said finally. They wanted to erase the past. They wanted, Wolfe said, a future without interruption. She looked up. So I was a loose end. A thread, Wolfe said. They intended to snip. She stared at the carpet, then at the window, then at the photo of Pamela Roy in the silver frame. Kramer shifted. Do you want us to handle this now? He asked Wolfe quietly. Soon, Wolfe said. Josephine stood. It wasn't strength. It was necessity. Can I see the garden? She asked. Kramer frowned. Wolfe gave a nod. I led her to the rear window. She looked through it, not really seeing. The orchids were dim in the glow of the rear lamp. They never told me why he left, she said. No, I said, they didn't. He was already gone when I got out of the clinic, she said. Yes. I thought he had vanished, she said. He had, a pause, but not the way I believed. No. She pressed a hand to the glass. Do you think, she asked, he knew? That you were supposed to be on that ferry? She nodded. I think, I said, he learned too late. She turned from the window, then walked back toward the office, back to Wolfe, back to Kramer, back to the room where she now knew the truth. She sat again, and this time she did not weep. The knock came at precisely 6 o'clock. 3 even raps, followed by the scrape of a shoe on the stone step. Fritz, of course, did not budge. I had been standing by the bookcase since 5 to the hour, anticipating the first arrival. I opened the door 8 inches, no more. Josephine Claymore stood in the twilight, pale under her veiled hat, gloved hands tucked neatly over a black envelope clutch. She nodded once, stepped inside without a word, and allowed me to take her coat. Her shoes were still damp. Inside the office, Wolfe was seated in the yellow chair, legs crossed, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The room smelled faintly of ink and orchid oil. The radiator clicked once and fell silent. Josephine took the red chair closest to the bookshelf. Her eyes scanned the room, then fixed on the small brooch laid atop the side table. The camellia glinted under the lamplight, ordinary, delicate, and not at all innocent. The bell rang again. This time I found Inspector Kramer. He was not in uniform, but the bulge in his coat pocket suggested a badge or worse. He grunted a greeting and entered with the same economy of movement he used for crime scenes and funerals. Kemba arrived last. Thin, hollow-eyed and windblown, he looked less like a lawyer and more like someone who had misplaced his alibi and wasn't sure where to look. His collar was askew, and he carried no briefcase. He stepped into the room and stopped cold. Wolfe did not rise. Kemba, Wolfe said, sit. The lawyer obeyed, folding into the far red chair as if gravity had taken a personal interest in his conscience. I assume you know why you're here, Wolfe said. Kemba swallowed. Yes. Wolfe gestured toward the brooch. This, he said, was retrieved from Miss Claymore's personal effects. Josephine glanced at it, then looked away. It contains microfilm, Wolfe said. A record of the real will, notarized in France, bearing Lucien Densmore's signature and the official seal of the consulate. Kramer let out a low whistle. And you're sure it's authentic? I've verified the seal, Wolfe said, and Saul Panzer corroborated the timeline. It is genuine. Kemba shifted. I didn't know. You knew something, Wolfe said. You witnessed a copy, forged under Clayton Weatherly's direction. You notarized it under duress. Kemba's face twitched. He looked at Josephine, then Kramer. I was threatened, he said. You thought no one would look closely, Wolfe interrupted. You thought the rightful will had been destroyed. Kemba sank lower in his chair. I couldn't leave the city, he said. They watched me. Even after Weatherly was gone, I didn't feel safe. You were never safe, Wolfe said. You were a tool, discarded as soon as the job was done. Kramer took a notepad from his coat. You're ready to testify? Kemba hesitated. Wolfe glanced toward the brooch. I have the original microfilm, he said. This is a copy. I would be delighted to let your conscience race mine to the courthouse. Kemba gave a small nod. I'll sign whatever you need. Kramer's pencil moved briskly. Josephine turned her eyes to Wolfe. What happens now? Wolfe did not answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, then reached for his glass of beer. It was untouched. The condensation had begun to bead. You're still alive, Wolfe said finally. That's more than most inherit. The sentence settled in the room like smoke. Josephine stood. She looked not at Wolfe nor Kramer nor Kemba, but at the fire, where a single log burned with a slow, persistent flame. Her expression was unreadable. Thank you, she said, not quite softly. Kramer rose with her. We'll arrange protection and a formal statement. She didn't nod. I helped her into her coat at the door. She paused on the threshold. Outside, the wind was rising. She did not look back. I closed the door. Inside, Wolfe finally lifted the glass, drank once and set it down again. Mr. Kemba, he said without looking up, you may leave now. Your usefulness is concluded. Kemba stood mute. I showed him out. When I returned, Wolfe had leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The room was still. Fritz poured the beer with a precision that rivaled surgery. Not a bubble broke rank. He set the glass on Wolfe's desk without a word and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving behind a faint scent of celery and thyme. Wolfe grunted, reached without looking, and took the glass. He held it for a moment. Then, as though the liquid required consideration, he swirled it gently before taking the first sip. The South, he said at last, voice as flat as sidewalk slate, breeds odd loyalties. I was leaning against the corner of my own desk, tie loosened, the window behind me open an inch to let in the autumn air. It smelled faintly of coal smoke and the bakery 2 doors down, where someone was taking the evening shift seriously. Meaning Josephine, I asked. Meaning Savannah, Wolfe replied, and its ilk. He didn't elaborate. He rarely did. Not when the words were working hard just standing there. I crossed the room, pulled the stub from my jacket pocket, and held it up between thumb and forefinger. A ferry stub, folded once, smudged with the oil of a dozen handlings. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. I didn't wait for comment. I tossed the stub into the fireplace. The flame caught the edge, turned it black, and curled it in on itself like a burnt petal. That one, I said, was never coming back. Wolfe said nothing. He rarely mourned symbols. I went back to my desk and sat, reached for the drawer on the right. Inside was something else, a dry cleaning receipt. Unremarkable, except for the scent. I lifted it close. Still there. Roses. Not garden ones. The kind that lived in perfume bottles and old silk scarves. Josephine Weatherly had mailed it with a short letter. Handwritten, delicate script. No frills. The paper had a faint grain and the return address was Savannah, Georgia. She was closing the estate, tying up what strings hadn't been cut by fire, betrayal, or inheritance. I didn't reread the letter. I didn't need to. It had said enough the first time, and besides, I hadn't kept it, just the receipt. A square of cream paper with an old fold and that lingering smell. Wolfe cleared his throat. I presume, he said, that she enclosed no further mystery. Just gratitude, he sniffed. As ambiguous as ever. The fire in the grate gave a soft pop. Wolfe looked at it as if it had insulted him. She survived, he said. I nodded. Many do not. He drained the glass, set it down with a thunk. The room went quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock, a sound Fritz refused to let fall out of time. I suppose, Wolfe muttered, there are worse fates than losing a home. I turned the receipt in my hand. She didn't lose it, I said. She gave it away, stone by stone. Wolfe gave a grunt that could have been approval or indigestion. She asked what she should do next, he said, a question only the living feel entitled to ask. I slipped the receipt back in the drawer, closed it gently. She's not haunting anything, I said, nor being haunted. Wolfe leaned back in the yellow chair, the leather creaking just enough to register. Archie, he said. Yes, sir. Remind me, what was the precise motive for murder in this case? I thought about it, I really did. Turned it over like a card at the end of a game. Fear, I said, of exposure. I shook my head, of not mattering. Wolfe let out a low breath. Sentimental, but accurate. The fire dimmed. I stood, walked to the window and opened it a hair wider. Outside, 35th Street ticked like a wristwatch. A cab rolled by slow. A man with a paper under his arm turned the corner. Manhattan was doing what Manhattan did best, moving forward with no permission asked. Behind me, Wolfe shifted again. Have you written the final report? No need, I said. The facts were all laid out. Kramer has the microfilm. Kemba made his statement. Josephine left the keys with the lawyer. And Clayton? Dead, confirmed. Wolfe didn't answer, not right away. When he did, his voice had settled into something almost drowsy. Then the ghost, at last, has no house. I turned. He was staring into the fireplace, the flame down to embers. Some ghosts, I said, don't haunt the living. Wolfe tilted his head. I shrugged. They just leave a scent behind. I walked to the coat rack, picked up my hat, and felt the weight of the evening settle back on my shoulders. Wolfe said nothing more. He didn't need to. Behind me, the brownstone folded into itself again, quiet, secure, as it always had been, and would be, so long as some of us stayed to keep watch.